kind of knowledge, skills, and competences are needed and how to achieve them. As it was wisely stated yesterday during our inspiring sessions, a society's greatness can no longer be measured by the effectiveness of education for the labor market alone. Today, we must put more emphasis on how much learners contribute to the reinforcement of civil society. In what ways can higher education inculcate a more meaningful sense of collective and individual agency and enlarge the scope of the curricula with deeper social, ethical, and conceptual questions that go far beyond the immediate purview of the subject matter. We are all witnesses of changing mindset of both students and academics for the post-pandemic new normal. Advancing technologies more than ever in the classroom, of course, multiple learners, multiple modes of delivery, to name some. And we are wondering if they are still present as the relics of the pandemic, or is it a sign of the new educational environment? Conventional face-to-face skills provision has its value and is definitely necessary, particularly in the some fields of studies. However, student-centric approach requires reconsidering the understanding of how now, given the enhanced level of digital literacy of society and the changing concept of the working place, we can efficiently address the imperative of leaving no one behind and ensure inclusive, accessible, and societal needs-driven education. OECD suggests that accessibility should be embraced in the design of learning programs, while traditional educational delivery and acquisition methods are sufficient in the pre-digital era. The digital transformation has had a significant impact on the higher education sector, leading to an increased demand for more digital teaching methods to access students from different regions, countries. So blended learning, which had quite little accepted before the pandemic, is no more an option. It is the necessity. Additionally, the need puts the pressure on higher education to reconstruct teaching methodology by using the strengths of face-to-face and online settings in an integrated fashion. The purpose of our IAU global events as this conference is to share information, thoughts, ideas, and experiences, bringing together voices of our universities from different regions of the world. During these sessions, we will have a unique possibility to listen to valuable presentations and go into a deep discussion with our three distinguished speakers, who luckily represent completely different regions of our world. Please excuse and correct me in case I mispronounce your name, but I would like to introduce Dr. Fernando León Garcia, president at CETIS University from Mexico. Also, Professor Henlef Andersen, rector of the University of Roskilde from Denmark, and Professor Eugenia Gerib, rector of Lamanova University from Tunisia. So, dear speakers, I want to kindly remind you that you have up to 15 minutes for each presentation, as after all of them, we are going to have a Q&A session with an auditor. So we are starting from our first honorary speaker, Dr. Fernando León Garcia, was appointed as the 6th president of CETIS University System in summer 2009, becoming the first alumni of the institution to do so. His tenure has been distinguished by the creation and implementation of the CETIS 2020 development plan, which has resulted in a substantial increase of institutional quality, multiple international accreditations, Western Association of Schools and Colleges, the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, Accrediting Council for Business Schools and Programs, and also global distinctions by higher education organizations such as Times Higher Education, QS, which reflect the strong focus of his leading and represented institution on research. As of July 2021 until July 2024, Dr. Fernando León Garcia is also a president of the International Association of University Presidents, IAUP. He currently serves or has served on boards and advisory groups related to international higher education, accreditation, governance, and institutional development. Fernando holds a doctoral degree in educational administration and policy analysis, an MA in international development education from Stanford University, as well as a BC degree in industrial engineering from CETIS University. So, distinguished professor, we are open to hear of your inspiring presentation. The floor is yours.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, President Inga, Žalėnienė, and to IAU for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. And what I will try to do in my presentation is not necessarily reflect any particular perspective from a specific region or country such as Mexico or Latin America or the Americas, but try to share with you what we have seen from different channels, different surveys that point in a certain direction in terms of where we are and how that impacts the teaching and learning that occurs at educational institutions. I hope that in the end, what we will find are some key aspects that we all need to consider, and the degree to which we implement them depends on our mission, our stage of development, and the degree of preparedness that our respective institutions happen to be. So, honored to share this panel with our distinguished guests from Tunisia and Denmark as well. Thank you. So I think that you've heard a lot about what has happened during the pandemic. Don't worry, I won't talk too much about the pandemic, but I will highlight a couple of aspects. And I think that before we go back to exactly what we were doing, we need to take note of what did work, what didn't work, and what kinds of things we experimented with that perhaps are appropriate on a go-forward basis. And that as we reflect what has happened, we also try to conceptualize into 3 stages, which is emergency, where we didn't know what we were doing, but we were all trying to continue serving our respective constituents. Then came the COVID shots and other measures that allowed us to control, to some extent, what was happening. And so institutions moved towards what we're currently still facing, most of us, transitional stage. And then eventually we will move towards what we are many calling the post-pandemic era, and that's transformation. I think that you've heard of several surveys. I will draw from several surveys. One of them is the IAUP survey, where I'll just underline a couple of things, some obvious ones, but that do not get enough credit. And that's that in order for universities to do what they did, or what we all did during the emergency stage, transition, and whatever it is that we want to do during the transformational or post-pandemic era, faculty are key. That's very important. Second thing, and this is a common theme or a recurrent theme in this annual gatherings of IAU, internationalization, as we know it, has changed. And so we need to take note of what worked, how we defined it, and how on a go-forward basis, we need to be broader in our conception and how we act. And that at the same time, early on and then throughout, leaders, this was a survey of leaders, of presidents, vice chancellors, rectors, and equivalent. The call was for the next 3 to 5 years. Yes, of course, to reaffirm what was face-to-face, but also to increasingly move towards the incorporation of whatever was relevant in terms of hybrid and online. There was also a conference last year, and I'll just draw, there were many concepts that were on the table, but I'll draw a few here since there are many leaders or influencers in your respective institutions and organizations that will probably impact how well you move, how well you address the future. One is nimbility. I think that a term that we were all accustomed to hearing and still are hearing about is the notion of pivoting. Pivoting is simply adjusting. Nimbility is the capacity to act and adjust very quickly to whatever it is that you need to do to provide stability and continuity to your institution. So pivoting, nimbility, is a concept that is here to stay. There will be other pandemics, there will be other crises, and I think that it is important for us to do this. Second is the notion of bifocal leadership. And that's that, yes, we should mind the here and now, but let's see what that has in terms of impact for the future. So let's be mindful of both the short term and the long term. A third one, and I think that several panelists have already mentioned this, including as President Inga was mentioning, we need to make sure that even if we continue our commitment to the development of the whole person, there needs to be a greater relevance with respect to the workplace and to society. Fourth, which resonates, I think, with a common theme here, is the international and intercultural part. I think that if there was something that was strengthened through technology in this case, it was the bonds that existed or the bonds that were developed through technology during the pandemic. Fifth is the academic bank of credit. This comes from India, by the way. Pankaj Mittal mentioned this in the Indian Association of Universities, but that is also evident and present in other settings. And that's that increasingly you will find individuals who will have graduated after going through 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 institutions, and even working in between. And so it is important for institutions to be able to acknowledge, recognize, and formalize whatever previous learning learners have had, so that in the end, they can integrate all of what they've learned into something that we still call a degree. And then, of course, the call is for more personalized learning. We all learned about the fact that students were being addressed, but not appropriately. The pandemic only intensified the need to focus on students, student development, and student success. There's a theme that is not new, but I think that it was also intensified during the pandemic, and that relates to talent. There is talent any and everywhere we go. So we need to be mindful as educational institutions of the existence and then need to address Einsteins, those that have potential, have shown their potential, and we need to help them. Of course, recurrent theme, hopefully taking it to new levels, diversity and inclusion. Another call that is common, we called it social responsibility before, but there's a call that we need to relate more to the communities. And then that during the pandemic, we were all cognizant and experienced more empathy, greater solidarity, more flexibility, but at the same time, many were able to identify and act on opportunities. And I think as we're moving towards the post-pandemic era, we need to not only act, but recall what is our mission, our commitment to quality, that whatever we do, we need to make sure that it is done with operational and financial sustainability. A one-off experience is not going to help. It has to be something that is going to be there 5, 10, 15 years or more. And that we can't be all things and do all things for all constituents. So we have to be strategic. There was another more recent piece, and this is only to share with you that during the emergency stage, there was a very negative perception as to what was happening and what the future bode for us. As we move towards transition, and now currently, there's a more positive perspective. And this is only to share a piece written by Jeffrey Salingo, linked to Inside Higher Education, where you can see that the perception or the notion of where we are headed is more positive. And related to the theme, here are some key areas that Salingo's piece identifies. And of course, TOPS is teaching and learning. What is it and how is it that we want to do it, implement it, adjust on a go-forward basis? But there are other key themes there as well. IAU, of course, you heard yesterday, has done 2 surveys, and I'll just share a small segment of it because it's important. And that said, while there were many negative perceptions or opinions, there was nevertheless an identification and the respondents stressed that there had been enhanced transversal collaboration across institutions. Partnership, collaboration, despite the pandemic, despite no face-to-face, which means it can be done if we want to, if we value it. And of course, a lot of implications with respect to research. Recently, we had the fortune of visiting one of the leaders in innovation in higher education, and I just share with you how they see their future. Paul LeBlanc, many have heard of him. Paul LeBlanc and Michael Crow are indisputably the 2 leaders in the Americas in terms of where universities should be headed. One is public, one is private. Both are huge. Both have over 100,000 students, but they weren't that big a long time ago. But I think the important thing is less about where we are, the challenges, and more where we need to move. And as you see, there's a greater alignment, a move towards modular offerings, more specific in terms of competencies, and also not to talk about the degree as the only concept, but of different and multiple pieces that provide entry and multiple points of entries to the learning experience of both the traditional learners as well as the non-traditional learners. But that's Southern New Hampshire. Again, there's another piece by IFC, that's the financing arm of the World Bank and Deloitte, and they identified some of the same themes that President Inga was mentioning: learner-centric, online learning, employer collaboration, student as a customer, in the sense of minding the service and support provided to them. And again, the importance of competencies and competency-based education. A more recent gathering, this was in Colombia. This was about 3 weeks ago. And here we had the fortune of having Arizona State represented there. And they reminded us that, sure, we can continue as we move towards the post-pandemic era to incremental changes, but universities are challenged right now to think about transformational outcomes for their institutions and for the constituents they serve. That universities need to be a little bit more entrepreneurial in what they do. They need to think about leapfrogging solutions. Incremental is good, but sometimes major exponential changes are good. And that we need to think about solutions at scale. And this positions us to focus more on an increasingly innovative future. You heard about 2030. And here we had the fortune of having Victoria Galan, one of the analysts for UNESCO and YESAL. And again, you know, I think it's important to highlight where we are and where we are headed. Of course, number one is the right to higher education. Number two is that whatever we teach or learn, it has to be transdisciplinary, more holistic. We have to think about the notion of cradle to grave, lifelong learning, flexibility and diversity, and again, competencies. So you see a common thread, common themes that are moving across. We also had the fortune of visiting during that trip to Southern New Hampshire, MIT and Harvard. And again, you see even, excuse me the expression, even MIT, even Harvard are thinking about some of the same concepts that we are talking about here. Building more community, enriching the learning environment, assessing learning. But what surprised me the most is in the case of Harvard, they just put out a report which is called the Report of the Harvard Future of Teaching and Learning again. And I direct you in particular to number 3 and number 4. At a very traditional, typically institution, what you find is that there's an argument that blended learning experiences can make learning more interactive, more collaborative, and at the same time, more inclusive and more global. As we are moving to the post-pandemic era, I think it's important, as I try to begin to close the conversation here of the presentation, to bring to the table what Tom Friedman has said at different points in time. As the pandemic was lingering on, he was calling and underlining the fact that during the pandemic, people were communicating, collaborating, and competing in more places, in more ways, with more people, across more countries than ever before. That's a positive, despite all the negative. And at the same time, in a subsequent piece that he published, he was calling our attention to the notion of the speed of change, the continuity of change. And so he was arguing that now and in the future, because of the speed and change, we will always need to be in a state of beta, always looking at what we need to pilot, always looking at what else is next. And that we need to take note, of course, and learn from this. And where are we headed? And this is, I believe, my final slide. And that's that, again, depending on the institution, depending on your mission, depending on your stage of development, we are essentially moving from what we had called a university, still calling it university, to the notion of global multiversity. Neither terms are new. Multiversity in the 60s was brought to the table by Clark Kerr as California and the US was looking at different ways of addressing different constituents. And so he called upon the notion of multiversity. That resulted in community colleges, the state colleges of California, and then the UC system, which was more for research. So the concept has been there. And then more recently, David Garza from Monterey Tech, referring more to the different constituencies that we are serving and more to the different ways in serving those learners, has called and brought to the table again the notion of multiversity. And of course, those of us who have been to numerous forums where we believe in international, and we hope there's more international, but that we're cognizant that we are at a location, at a region, and that we have an obligation to serve those that are there, then you have a dual role, dual focus of universities. So I would like to say that we're moving towards the global multiversity with variations depending on who you are, what's your mission, and where you happen to be. And that involves multiple learners, not only traditional, or if you were more of a continuing education and professional education organization, you will probably incorporate more of the traditional. Multiple modes of delivery, case or point made earlier right here. Multidisciplinary, again, I mentioned that 2-3 times. Multiple roles in the sense of there were some institutions that were doing more research, others that were doing more teaching and learning, others that were doing more outreach, but we have to address all three to some degree. And again, the notion of local relevance and global outreach. The global part, by the way, I'm not sure if it was the first time, but I remember in the early 90s, the Toronto Globe and Mail talking about free trade agreement, NAFTA. And they were talking about the need to acknowledge local and global, and they came up with a headline, global, moving to global. So we've incorporated that. And so I think that we're moving towards global multiversity. So with that, I hope that we have provided some thoughts on where we are, where we're headed, and that in terms of teaching and learning, we have identified some implications on the challenges, opportunities, and the role of higher education institutions and higher education leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your inspiring presentation, and I am sure that we will have a possibility to go in deeper to global multiversary idea during our sessions today and during the QA session. And now I want to move from Mexico to Europe, and I'm very happy to introduce our second speaker, Professor Henlef Andersen. She's from Denmark, and she took office as rector in 2014 after 3 years of being vice rector responsible for education at Roskilde University, Denmark. She holds a PhD in French literature and an MA in Romance philology, both from the University of Copenhagen. Professor Henlef Andersen has substantial experience in executive management and international consultancy. She chairs the educational committee of the Danish Rectors Conference and is a member of trusts and executive boards such as International Advisory Board for the Research Council in Norway, and of the expert evaluation panel for the Academy of Finland for competitive funding. She serves as president of the International Expert Committee for the French government's program on university program development, has international experience as an expert in quality assurance and quality development, as an expert for the Norwegian Quality Assurance Agency, as a member of Danish Accreditation Council. So dear Professor Han, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure being here and being able to discuss all these important issues for us as rectors, as responsible for education of young people in a world that is changing and always challenging. I'm going to talk about how education, about all the big things, all the great things we want to do with education, how important it is these years, and how at the same time we sometimes fall over other tendencies in our time. We want purpose-driven education. There's so many objectives of education these years. We've just seen how much we want from it. And then at the same time, we're very much into steering and controlling education. And sometimes we stumble over these things and it makes our objectives difficult to reach. So I'm going to discuss that dilemma, and then I'm going to discuss how you might go with it in particular teaching methods that might work. But I'm also going to problematize it, even though it's a method that we use at Roskilde University, because I find that it is difficult with the control and steering and with certain tendencies in our modern educational world to actually do what we preach. So that's the main thing about this, and very much student-centered. But what role has the student? Is the student still the agent, or is the student the object of what we're doing? So those are the issues I wish to discuss. And of course, it's very interesting also to relate to digitalization and globalization. But we'll see in our discussion how we can do that. So the skills and competences for the future, we are always in agreement on the fact that we want critical thinking. We want young people to be able to make judgments in their area, in their disciplines. We want them to take responsibility and we want them to collaborate. At the same time, understand media and artificial intelligence. Yes. Thank you so much. And to have strong soft skills, human strengths, and all the things that we call 21st century skills. But you cannot give that by telling that. If you have a lot of exams, if you have a lot of control, it might be challenging. So I'm just putting this up to say, yes, we agree, this is what we want. We cannot program young people. That's what I'm heading for, looking at whether we are trying to do that instead of, because I think that critical thinking is more than ever important, because we get artificial intelligence, because we can program robots, we can program so much. So how can we avoid not thinking of ourselves and our intelligence the same way? Because that is a tendency that the machines we use, we think of ourselves the same way. So the challenges, control, objectives, clear objectives, that's a wonderful thing. But if the objectives are so clear and so loud in front of the students, they will go for that instead of going for their inner motivation. And they might even be very strategic in their thinking. And you know how important CVs are today. So how can you feel that you are building a CV or yourself? Difficult situation for young people. And some of them really don't feel good about this. At the same time, I want to quote Stefania Giannini, who has already spoken here during this conference, for the fact that we need to educate for sustainable development. And she says in a presentation from UNESCO that that it is also that these competences that we are talking about, they're also needed in order to create change makers who are ready for global challenges and for the fast change that you have just talked about. So social, emotional, and behavioral learning are crucial tools to empower learners to make change happen. And we need to work together on a global level for that. So I would say that creating change makers, creating independent thinking, critical thinkers is related to sustainable education. But the challenges are that we have at the same time something sometimes called a performance culture, probably also facilitated by social media, the fact that you are an object very often to others. Also the grading, the way we look at sometimes grading from very clear objectives, very declarative objectives that I can declare that I can do now. Can be very, very good, but if you do it too much, you become just somebody trying to do exactly that. And at the same time, if you grade a lot, then grading becomes the objective of learning. And I'm putting performance culture up towards mastery of the discipline, or mastery of the subject, or mastery of the problem and of the solution. So just quoting Midgley and Erden, sorry, in this, saying that when the grading is very important and very frequent, then the object of the discussions in the classroom and between the students and the teachers become the grades. And how can I get a better grade, or what happened here and why did he get a better grade? So the discussion is about the performance and not about the discipline or the content. And this creates approaches to study that would be surface or even more a strategic approach. And that's a middle column that I'm going to just talk briefly about, saying that strategic learning is that you identify what is required by the marker or the examiner, and you focus on that. Clear objectives, grading from objectives, declarative objectives, and then it may or may not involve understanding. That is quite a risk, I would say. What drives the student is the intention to succeed or excel in an assignment or an exam. So learning for development, personal development, learning for content, learning for the good purpose might not be included in that. It's a risk. We have to balance these things. I'm dreaming about not grading, but I don't think it is possible. I know that some people here are working on such things. And in the 60s and 70s, in certain reform universities, you didn't grade, but it was probably another time. But we must be creative and think about how we can do it, how much we can do it, and how we grade. If we only grade on objectives and declarative objectives and goals, then maybe the grading becomes worse than if you grade on other things. And how much do you grade and when do you grade? I'm just saying that these things that I have listed here, strategic approach where high grades is the only thing that counts, grading from compliance to goals, objectives, and declarative competences, and admission at the next level conditioned by grades, creates an approach that facilitates to some student a surface approach. Really strong students are less affected than weaker students. And we want equal opportunities for everyone, I think. So in that connection, this is bad. So today's paradox is that we want originality, we want personal development, and we may be systemizing it too much so that we get system orientation instead. I think we should find the ways in our system, the approaches we have to education that can develop the intrinsic motivation of students. Because very often today, they look at us and they ask us, what am I supposed to do to get a better grade, to get integrated here? And they look at themselves from the outside, the extrinsic motivation with praise and reward. Punishment may be a little bit too much, but it depends on how they feel about it. And a very performance-oriented approach. The other way would be to feel, but you need to feel what is interesting to you, to be able to do things yourself together with others, and that you expect by working hard, you can actually learn it. Because if it has to come from inside, you have to find that. Otherwise, students might not work at all. And to live with uncertainty. To live with that as a student, you don't get a grade immediately. You're not always told if this is the right answer. So uncertainty is something to deal with if you want this approach. Of course, I think that problem-oriented project learning is an approach that may facilitate this. But at the same time, I will introduce a little bit how it can be worked with. But at the same time, if students are looking at their own individual prestation, or how would you say, what they are doing, their own individual delivery of knowledge, then it might be difficult for them to work in groups. And we do actually grade students individually in this. But the way we try to work with problem-oriented project learning at Roskilde University is that every semester all students engage in a project. And they always have to work in groups. Except for the master's project, they're allowed to work alone. This is the ministry that has decided that it should be possible to always write or do a project on your own for the master thesis and also for the bachelor's last thesis. But as we do a project every semester of the first 6 semesters, the next 2 at the master's level, it is possible to learn to collaborate and to learn to formulate a problem. We always have a problem formulation seminar where students discuss the different problems they can work with in different groups, and they go from one group to another and learn about how to formulate a good problem. Formulating a good problem is a very, very important skill. And I have heard, discussing with you, new approaches where this is really the center. What is a good problem formulation? If you wish to work in an interdisciplinary way, it's very difficult to find a good problem because a problem is often related to our disciplines. So that's really something we train with the students. 2, 3, 4 days of seminar where they work on the problems. And then during the rest of the semester, of course, they also work with the problems together. We have a mid-term seminar where they get peer feedback, another thing that is quite facilitating for learning, the fact that you give feedback to other groups, and you also get feedback from an external supervisor. Otherwise, during the semester, you have your own supervisor. And at the end, oral group exam, where you have an external examiner and the internal examiner, and you discuss the project with them, and you get feedback in that way. So that's an approach where you have to be at the center. It is definitely student-centered because you need to be able to formulate what you think is important. It has been just said or criticized for being just group work, just sitting in a group and doing what you want to do. That's a relaxed way compared to the strong objectives and the steering and the control. So what we did was that we made a research center, a research center on problem-oriented project learning at our university, just as in Aalborg University in Denmark, that is also a problem-oriented project university. And we digged out the 7 most important principles of PPL, and we present them to the students so that they know the method they are in. And we also discuss with them what are the big learning philosophers that we build our strategy on from Dewey on and during the 20th century of learning philosophy and learning theory. So in order to show that something that sounds soft compared to all the hard control and steering and declarative competences and grading and all the other system, you need to show that this is a serious approach. Otherwise, students may feel that they are not being mastered. Actually, we want to build mastery and build students who think themselves as critical thinkers and who are motivated by what they work with and who work in an interdisciplinary way. But this is challenging because they want security. They want all the things I talked about. And that is the balance, and that is the challenge and the dilemma that I wanted to present to you. And just at the end say that these are some ideas of how to work with sustainable problem-based learning or problem-oriented project learning, that it is real-life problem-solving skills that we work with, and that it is always bound to the context, that the culture of measurement can strengthen the isolating effects of students in this, that we are really in between 2 systems. But that it is important for all of us, I think, to reconnect, and that's what we are saying, with purpose, the purpose in education, the motivation, the inner motivation of the students who are really eager to try to deal with all the problems we have participated in creating for them. And develop skills, just as a craftsman wants to develop skills and focuses more on the work than on himself or herself. So that would be the ideal, and that would be my presentation of dilemmas in modern education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for this inspiring presentation. You know, I am wondering, we all are involved in sustainability issues, in whole institutional approach, interdisciplinarity, but I'm wondering, and it's of course for the discussion, how current university structures are they have to change, I think, to foster interdisciplinarity and sustainability. Because when you inspired us how Roskilde University is making this educational journey more meaningful and connected to the problems. But hierarchical university structures in a lot of universities worldwide do not support this model. So how we will have to change it? It will be also a question for other phase of our session. And now from Europe to Africa. So let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Žalėnienė is a professor of strategic management at the University of Manouba in Tunisia. She holds a PhD from the University of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne in France, and has published over 30 scientific publications and conference papers. Her research interests include strategic decision-making, corporate social responsibility, entrepreneurial orientation, and sustainable development goals. She was elected as Vice Rector for Research and International Relations in 2011, then in 2014. She was later elected as the 6th Rector of the University of Manouba in 2017 and re-elected again in 2020, becoming the first woman in Tunisia to do so. As rector, Professor Žalėnienė devotes her efforts to making scientific research results of the university more visible and to align the quality of education with international standards, making so with a constant interest towards the well-being of the entire community. By relying on technology and culture as accelerators, she works to increase the societal impact of the university and open the way to a sustainable modernization of the Tunisian society as a whole by educating responsible and innovative citizens rooted in their context as well as connected to the global world. So, dear Professor Žalėnienė, the floor is yours.
Do you see me? It's better like that. Thank you. Thank you, Inga. Thank you to the AIU for the invitation. It's a very pleasure to be here and to be the only representative of my country. So I'll try to have a presentation in 3 parts. I'll set the scene with a contextual perspective to let you know more about Tunisia and about my university. And I'll try to ask some questions. I had some answers, but I try to give more answers about what about tomorrow's world and give you some insights from Tunisia, what about the best practices in my university, and finish with the constraints and challenges to do more. So what about Tunisia? Tunisia is the northest country in a very big continent, Africa. It's a gateway of Africa. And it has about 1,148 kilometers of Mediterranean coastline. So it's very near to Europe. This is not an invitation to come to Tunisia, but this gives us a very, very good country where we have a very good level of living. We have the sun, we have the sea, we have the Sahara, we have the mountains, but we have over 3,000 years of history, and I have very picture here, but the 3 pictures are very important for me. The foundation of Carthage, the women. This is the, and in the top, the figure of the first president of the Republic of Tunisia, Habib Bourguiba, who invested in 2 things for the country after the independence, in education and health. And he invested in women. And we have in Tunisia one of the most progressive statutes, personal code, and women have many rights that other countries don't have. The last figure is the figure of what happened in 2011 and the beginning of the spring, the Arab Spring that began in Tunisia. Tunisia has few natural resources. We don't have gas, we don't have petrol, but we have a very great human potential. We have about 12 million inhabitants, half women, 40% under 25 years. We have a very good index of human development, 0.74, and we have very good indicators in literacy rate and primary school enrollment rate. This is one of the consequences of the investment in the education. But we have very, very big socio-economic gaps. First is the political instability. In 10 years, we had 12 governments, 12 ministries of higher education. We still have significant inequality. This was the base of the revolution, but it's still here. We have poor infrastructure. The regulation is very old. We have low wages and income per capita, low productivity, and we have two problems that are the responsibility of university: high graduate unemployment rate and high brain drain. So what about our higher education system? Our higher education system have very strong foundation. We have 30 public universities, mine is one of this. We have free tuition fees. We have about 23,000 faculty members and 270,000 students. And we have a budget of 5.4% of the total budget of the country. If you believe ranking, well, we are not so bad in ranking, and about 60% of universities are ranked in the Times Higher Education. We are ranked second in worldwide in percentage of science and engineering graduates, percentage of population, and we are ranked first in Africa and MENA for female researchers, and first African and Arab country associated age 2020. But we have very, very good symbolic importance in Tunisia. In Tunisia, diploma is very, very important. In Tunisia, politics and academic freedom have never been touched in all these years. And during the revolution, even if the revolution doesn't come from the university, but in the university, we have very good resistance. And in my university in particular, in March 7, one day before Women's Day, had a attack from the Salafists in the university, and they wanted to change the flag, but women just jumped on the floor spontaneously, and she said no. And this was the end of this type of attempt to let the university change the model of society. So in Tunisia, university and all the civil society that is very, very strong in Tunisia comes from the university. This is the good vision of university in Tunisia. The bad one is the unemployment. When we have so educated people and there is no employment, the university is seen as the third mission is not very good. And we have a broken social left. So a social contract, a new social contract is needed. We tried to reform the system. One of the reforms was the election. That's why I'm elected, women elected in a university in an Arab country, and even in Western country, twice is something that is very important, and it is the change in governance that give that. But from 2011, the reform is defeated and slow to be set up. I'll give you 2 or 3 things about the university, and I go back to the insights. My university, the University of Manouba, is the university that is in Tunis, but that is in the very poor region, agricultural region. And one of the things that we have done, and we are very proud of, is that the metro came to the region because of the university. This is one of the things that we can do, that we did for the region, and this is the third mission of our university. The university was founded in 2000, but many of our institutions are older because the universities was created late. Institutions were created before the universities. So I have 15 institutions, and the last one is Manuba School of Engineering, and it's the first English speaking School of Engineering in Tunisia. This is the number of my university, for discussion after. And we have 133 diploma and certificates in 4 scientific fields: humanities and information science, economy and business, technology and arts, and life and environment science, with some fields that are unique in Tunisia as geopolitics, communication, journalism, documentation, cinema, geomatics, veterinary school, special education studies, and ecological engineering. The University of Manuba is the only university to have this type of undergraduate. No, this is too long. For the ranking, the University of Manuba has searched 2 types of ranking, even if I don't believe in ranking, but everybody is searching for, so why not? The ranking of the Times Higher Education and the Times Higher Education Impact ranking. This is the 2 types of ranking we are working on, and currently ranked first in Tunisia in the last Times Higher Education ranking with an impact citation of 32.7, that is very good in Tunisia. In the Shanghai ranking, we are ranking on subject, not on the whole overall subject in veterinary school and sports. So our vision is, our values: critical thought, creativity, and conviviality, a modern and responsible university. And what we try to do is provide students with constructive energies and vision to start changing local realities on their way to transform the world. This is very important for us, that they begin with their environment, direct environment, to go for to transform the world. So this is my university, this is my country. But what do I mean by tomorrow's world? Tomorrow's world for me, and this has been said, is characterized by a high homogenization with global framework, ranking, accreditation. Everybody's doing the same thing. We have students that came from digital native, and we have alpha generation students. We have millennial generation teacher, different ways of working, traveling, learning, consuming, more interest in sustainable development, search of meaning of life. Now, 85% of jobs do not yet exist, it seems. Plethora of information, digitalization, artificial intelligence. These are the topics that have been discussed yesterday and that are discussed in all the conferences. But what's special about tomorrow's world too? I think that it depends on collective ability to save humanity and diversity while using this global framework. This is one of the good traits that I have as a developing country, that I'm going in the street where I don't have the means, I don't have the resources to attain the objective that has already been created by others. The second is that we are in 2022. 2020 is not so far. We have the ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope so. So in the Sustainable Development Goal, we have the SDG 4. This is our responsibility as universities. And the SDG 4 give us the solution, give us the objective. We have to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So all the universities are searching to attain this objective. But do we have the same resources? Do we have the same needs? Maybe not. What do I do in Manuba? To attain the SDG 4, we began by transforming the university and transforming four things. We worked a lot on transforming recruitment methods and explain why, pedagogical methods, curricula, and support key actors of the higher education systems, because faculty is the key, as it has been said. this is some example. Recruitment of students in Tunisia is national. So the baccalaureate is national, and after that there is a sort of offer and demand, and depending on the strength of your institution, you'll have the best student or not. So because we don't choose our student for the undergraduate, bridges with primary and secondary education system is very, very important for us. So we go to secondary education system schools to let them put our institution from the best institution they want to go. We have open university days for the community, and this is for lifelong education. For pedagogy, and we have the student entrepreneur stages. I know that there is in France, maybe in my other countries, but this is important for us to have students that have these skills in entrepreneurship. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur. So if you have an idea, you can have a special statue in the university to have less lessons and to can practice its strength in entrepreneurship. In pedagogy, what is important is that we focus on experimentation in context. All the projects are done with the region for local needs, and this is very important for us. And now for soft skills, there is a national program for soft skills. For curricula and life for pluridisciplinarity. I tried for 9 years now to put researchers together to work on the same concept. We have a symposia that we do every year, and we have biology, veterinary, computer science, and humanities that work on order and disorder, where they work on time. And this is very, very difficult to put researchers on from this different discipline to do that. But it's easier with students. It's very easier with students when we have a faculty that believe in that. And in the curricula, we created many diplomas that are in the pluridisciplinarity, and they are very, very good, and that the students want to follow. And this is something very important for us. In the curricula, we impose technology for humanities and humanities for technology in the courses. The humanities are very, very important for engineering for us, and technology is very important for humanities for us. We have SDG-oriented courses, and we have international collaboration in some masters. And I explain why this poses problem. And last but not least are actors, and this is the problem. We are in capacity building to shift from teaching to learning, to link research and teaching. And we are doing a very, very long job for advocacy and lobbying to adapt regulation, because the problem is that our staff, our faculty member, we have a very, very high brain drain, not only for students, but for faculty members. Our university are empty now because the salaries are not very good, and because they want to go in other countries. This is one of the problem we have. So we tried with our context to apply and to experiment some actions to achieve the SDG 4. But I told you about the socio-economic problem. There are other problems. I have a motivation problem of faculty members. This motivation problem comes from the lack of autonomy of our university. I said that we don't choose students. Is there any university here that don't choose students? I'm the one. We don't choose students for the undergraduate, and this is a lack of autonomy that we are struggling to change. There is a loss of vocation and high brain drain problem in the faculty member. People don't want to go in the higher education system. We have restrictions to mobility, and this is for our postdoctorate and doctorate. You know that Tunisia pays for doctorate to go abroad, and because of the visa, some of the money is not spent because they don't have the visa. Postdoctorate and doctorate. We have teaching and learning conditions for student and teacher, and for employment, we have an economic fabric of SMEs. So it's not really a big market, and a market that can absorb this amount of well-educated people. So summarize all of that. Tunisia have invested in education. We have well-educated population, but we have economic problems, socio-economic problem that the responsibility is university, of course, and we are trying to have the third mission is very important for us. We have a very good social capital in the country, but if economically the country doesn't stand, maybe down 2 or 3 years, we have less than 1,000 faculty members, and the problem of unemployment won't be resolved. So the reform is on the table now with this ministry. We have another government in three months, and maybe next year I'll be more optimistic. I'm always optimistic, but maybe next year I think that all the investments that have been done on education in Tunisia is an example of many things, but now we are in crisis. We learn more about this crisis, and the future will certainly be better. Thank you.
Thank you all our distinguished speakers. And now it's the most important moment of a plenary where we will engage in the conversation. So before giving the floor to our auditory, I think that we can start answering this question which I raised before. You know, we all understand the transformative power. We do a lot at our institutions, but what are the main major drivers that support this quality transformation of teaching and learning, but also what are the factors that hinder it, what are the obstacles, and do our hierarchical university systems are equipped to the transformation we are going through. So maybe starting from Professor.
Well, I think that it's a loaded question. So I think that it's important to try to address different arenas in which this can occur. I think that on the one hand, it is important to acknowledge that faculty were key, that we are facing a change in paradigm, that we have to rely and work with the faculty, unless we want to, of course, bring new faculty, but that would be a university and probably the end of our presidencies at our respective universities. So I think that we need to work with the faculty. We need to support them. We need to reward them. But at the same time, we do need to encourage and explore new structures. I think you ask us the question of trans or interdisciplinarity. I think a very good example is at your own institution with the MRU Hive. And that's inducing or causing ways in which faculty can come together. So it will require acknowledging the role of the faculty, supporting changes, rewarding, but at the same time, moving towards structures that encourage and facilitate transdisciplinarity. And I think that leaders need to be facilitators of that and not necessarily impose. So this would be some opening reflections on the theme.
Thank you. I don't know if it's the same thing in the other countries, but the career of because I think too that faculty member is the key. But in my country, I know it's the same thing in France and maybe in most European country, the career is on research, not on teaching. So if you want to have a good career, you have to be a good researcher. And if teaching doesn't appear as something very important, we won't have what we want to have, and we won't shift and have this type of education we want. So I think that some cultural transformation in our mission as a faculty member is needed to give the teaching the importance it should have in the careers, because this is one of the most important things we have to do.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. And of course, you can add lots of things about publication strategies and disciplines that we live with and by. But I think I have been very inspired in this conference by the local and the global, by the collaboration with the world outside, and with real problem solving again. And I think that it is an advantage that researchers know each other at the university, that you are not in a faculty that's very closed, that you participate in. It depends on the size of university, but that it's possible to meet each other across disciplines, because otherwise you can get pictures of what is humanities or what is science, and maybe not collaborating. So real world problems and a faculty that actually meets, and the same for the students, that you're used to knowledge from different parts of university.
Yes.
I think I need to say this because it's important. Yesterday, we heard that there are 250 million and that over 20,000 institutions. I believe that out of those 20,000 institutions, most are teaching focused. They're not research focused. So I think that if we're talking about transdisciplinarity or multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, then we need to make sure that we acknowledge that, so that we can implement, promote, and reward with appropriate policies to do that. I have no problem, for example, in sharing with you that in the case of Cetis University, it was created more as a teaching institution, and we're moving towards research. And the way of doing that is making sure that the workload policies, the rewards, the career progression are such that you are encouraging that. If you are a research institution and your problem is good teaching, then you need to work on those policies also. And I agree. I think that the connection to other arenas definitely helps. It speeds up, in particular, if your partners are beyond where you are. And so it's going to take a deliberate effort. In the case of our institution, for example, one of the things that we've done is promoted what we call centers of excellence. First thing was to make sure that the different departments within the same college, engineering, they were all collaborating because they tend to work in silos. So we've done that. Second stage is making sure that the centers of excellence are collaborating with each other. And so we've got business beginning to collaborate with engineering, social science beginning to collaborate with business and engineering. So I think that universities are not structured and do not operate in that manner. So we need to create the conditions and reward that as leaders in order for this to move forward. Yes, researchers have their networks, but we need to try to help take them to the next step.
So thank you, President. It's also relates to my institution as well. We were talking, yes, the structures are changing and we need to find new ways of motivating, collaborating in order to face all the challenges. So dear colleagues, now it's time for comments and questions from the auditory. Oh, I see. So let us start maybe from our president, Pam Fredman. IAU president, please.
Thank you very much for a very interesting session. I would like to highlight the connection and not to disconnect research and education. So we have also a responsibility to see that even teaching-oriented institutions get the possibility to be connected to research, even though there will not be a research university, and that includes the merit system. But then I have a couple of questions, and that is, I'm intrigued by what you said, Fernando, about the stackable way to take courses and then add to that. And I think that that is a very good thing for the development, for lifelong learning. But how do we get stakeholders to recognize when it's not a program? The other question is to any one of you, and that is, you described, Hannah, the problem-based learning or project-based learning, which I like very much. But how do we proceed doing exams so that the examinations be more oriented to see what has been learned, what is the development of the students, than just having tick off boxes? So that's a question to all of you.
Well, I think that even before the pandemic, there was a call for modular, stackable ways of packaging the curriculum. I think the need and the call has only intensified. And I think it takes, on the one hand, greater innovation and creativity on the part of academics to do it, because we haven't done it in the past. But on the other hand, to try to make sure that as we're doing this, we are in communication with the business, industry, and society, so that we are designing those modular pieces in ways that are relevant. And so what I think the argument at Southern New Hampshire is that up until now, the unit of analysis is a course. The course as we know it, 45 hours, 36 hours, whatever the case might be. But as we're moving towards beyond contemplating stackable and actually implementing it, there are ways of dissecting that so that you offer pieces that are integrated in multiple ways and that do not necessarily fit one course, but several. So I think that two things. One, it's going to require a different approach to curriculum development, and it will require more interaction with the external environment so that that happens. And I think a mechanism for that for all institutions is to have some kind of advisory committee or council that brings them together on a regular basis. In our case, we have been very successful bringing in multinational industries in Northwest Mexico. And, you know, they've defined the kinds of things that they want. It doesn't mean each thing is a course, but each thing does, you know, combine with others so that you have discrete sets of skills, knowledge, and competencies that you then try to design. So I think, you know, it's work in progress, but it is definitely something that is going to be important. If we relate that to the notion of an increasing population that will have studied or have had experiences in more than one setting, then it is important to look at multiple entries and also multiple exits. And the stackable will allow you. It allows you so that if you want to study and you want to progress, you don't have to necessarily start as undergraduate student, freshman, year one. You could start elsewhere and then begin to construct, so that in the end, the aggregate is the equivalent to what we call a degree. So that's the concept.
Yeah, then I'll just try to answer the question about exams in PPL or PBL. And I would say that the important thing is not to close the objectives too much. That sometimes we talk about open-end exams where the result, you can't say exactly what the result is because you posed the question, the problem. The students did that themselves. I think that we need to not declare too carefully, and then we need to train the examiners so that we can actually trust them for having strong judgmental skills. Because if we want to control again everything in the exam and students can complain about any grade, then we are at the track we don't want. So I think we need to really train the examiners also when they're researchers, because it actually is important skills.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Romeris, the former Vice Chancellor of National University Delhi. And we in this session were supposed to discuss the opportunities and the challenges about learning and teaching. During COVID and thereafter, we found that you discussed about opportunities, but one of the worst challenges we faced, I also saw in my own university, was the challenge of mental health. And I fear that none of the speakers addressed that issue, which was very, very serious in all the institutions.
Thank you so much, maybe Professor, on mental health.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I was focusing on other things pertaining to teaching and learning, but yes, very important. I think I just mentioned it in passing. And that's that universities have had, you know, student development centers, and that they've had centers that have psychological support, but with COVID that intensified. And what we know right now is that number one, what we were doing is not enough. Number two, it takes an army of collaborators with whom to move forward so that this support is actually effective. I think that the level of importance has been heightened. There's even the case of the UK, where they have just designated the UK student development champion. That's Vice Chancellor Edward Peck from Nottingham Trent University. And one of the most important things that they're addressing is precisely student emotional health. So I think that is going to be very important on a go-forward basis. It is not something that we can deny, forget, or just set aside. It's part of our challenge to the future. How much we do and how we do it will depend again on where was our stage of development. In some cases, it's only increasing the number of folks doing it, increasing hybrid ways of doing it. In others, they didn't have it. They have to start from scratch. So it is part of the setting within which we now have to operate as universities. It has to be a fixed aspect that we address.
Yes, in Tunisia during the COVID, we experimented a very, very good collaboration with the social economic world. We have a virtual university, so all the course online was very quickly done, because we have a university that works for the other university. But we did two things. The first one is inclusion, and all the banks were very both the infrastructure, the computers for students. So students that didn't have the infrastructure had it, and banks paid for that. And we made, or because we are very good in computer science, they had an application for the students, for the mental health of students, and they had they were very assisted by psychologists during all this period that was very, very hard for everyone, and especially for students. So this crisis proved that the university, when it's open to its environment, can be very, very good in delivering the courses and saving the mental health of students. And this was a doctoral dissertation after that. So it was a really good practice in research, in teaching, and in collaboration with the social economy.
Thank you. Professor Roberto, please.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to mention that this equation of teaching and learning is a very interesting and difficult one. And one of the reasons I say so, because it is because not everybody learns in the same way. I mean, there are very, very different ways of learning. And that makes the process of teaching a complex one, and make us think of what kind of instruments, pedagogies, and so on, we need to take into account and to incorporate to really meet that diversity, that heterogeneity of things. And that, I think, is particularly important in places or in countries where there are different ethnicities and different groups, different socioeconomic levels, and so on and so forth. How would you attack I mean, that challenge.
Well, that's the argument I was trying to make with local multiversity, that if we have been accustomed to one population segment, 18 to 24, face-to-face, residential, that's going to change. And so for two reasons. Number one, we need to acknowledge that there are different ways of learning. We already saw that there are different pedagogies that could work, and therefore the institution has to be positioned so that it has multiple ways of offering to the multiple learning. So this might translate in some cases to universities having a program that not only has face-to-face, but hybrid and online. Some learners learn better with hybrid and online than face-to-face, and others don't. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that you have the choice so that students can enter whichever format is appealing to them as a learner. Two institutions are already doing that. The big ones I mentioned. Unfortunately, it's the big ones. Arizona State and Southern New Hampshire University. Michael Crow, Paul LeBlanc. And they basically say, how do you want to study? You want to study face-to-face residential? I've got that. You want to study online? I've got that. You want to combine? I have a hybrid. In the case of Southern New Hampshire University, it has 180,000 students, but it does have a residential campus. And so it is known more for the 177,000 students that it has online, but those that are residential have the option of doing hybrid or online. The student who was giving us a tour, we asked him, what's your, course load? He said, oh, I have 5, 6 courses. And what do you think? Oh, I take 3 of them face-to-face, 1 is hybrid, 2 are online. And what do you think? Depending on the subject, it allows me to move forward. So I think choice on a go-forward basis for those who can offer choice is going to be important to acknowledge those different, learning styles and possible teaching approaches.
So thank you very much. But we are approaching to networking break as we have already time over. So thank you, distinguished speakers, for all the conversations, and for those who had no possibility to comment and to give questions to our panel. So please be free to contact them during networking break at the 8 a.m. So thank you very much and have a pleasant time together.